Hey everybody, Jeff here. Today I'd like to talk about something very basic, right down to, sort of like the beginner level. What is Photoshop? So some folks, I'm sure, out there have heard, of photoshopping things. There was a time when the phrase was even airbrushing. People would say, oh, that photo's been airbrushed. Now, certainly there was a time in the past where photographs may have been airbrushed, whereas now most everything has been brought through a program like Photoshop. Many photographers starting out are familiar with programs like Lightroom, where they're able to do quite a bit of image editing right in the program, organize their files, things like that. So what is it that Photoshop has that one could not do in Lightroom? And we'll talk about that. Photoshop is an image editing program, and I feel like the best mantra for it is select to effect. Most everything that you do in Photoshop allows you to make very, very precise local selections of objects, of things, of aspects of your photograph, and then affect them in some way to either change the color, change the tonality, to move that object around, to duplicate that object, to composite one object into another image altogether. And so that's in essence what Photoshop is all about. It's not just a program that you could open up a raw file where you could open up a raw file in Adobe Camera Raw, which shows up in Adobe Photoshop, and process it just like you would in Lightroom. What Photoshop does not contain is a database where you can catalog the images. And that's where programs like Lightroom and Capture One Pro shine, is that they're able to do some image editing, not too precise, but pretty precise. And then to be able to organize and catalog and keyword those images later. Photoshop is really more of a beast when it comes to really complicated selections of complicated items. When you can't get at it in Lightroom, you can get at it in Photoshop. So Photoshop is good for not just global edits, but local edits as well. You can do a certain amount of spot retouching. You can do beyond spot retouching of entire objects right out of the scene. So you can see in this image of my little dog Lola, I wrapped her in this fun, it's kind of a comical image, I wrapped her in this fun fur here. And in Lightroom, we have the spot removal tool. And in Photoshop, it's called the clone stamp. And we have healing brushes and clone stamps that kind of operate differently, but you can see that I can come in and I can remove these spots. I could remove, aspects of the photo that I'd like. I could come in even closer if I want on this image and look around, and, if she needed any beauty retouching, I could do that sort of thing for her, remove these eye bits here. So certainly Photoshop is a retouching tool. It's for going in on your photograph and doing non-destructive editing. You can see I'm working on this blank layer in my layers palette, which allows me to toggle those changes that I've made on and off. So it's a non-destructive editing. I can save this file, open it up in 10 years. That layer is still there. I can turn it on and my retouching is intact. In case a client comes back to me and says, oh, hey, we need you to tweak this a little bit more, what have you. I have the layers intact here, which allow me to get back to this retouching and make changes as I need. If I decide that, if I need to undo this work, I could pop on a layer mask here and I could bring back a certain amount of the information from one area versus another. So Photoshop is an image editor, certainly for retouching purposes. Global edits are something we can do. I could come in and if I wanted to make this whole image brighter or more contrasty, that sort of thing. Or maybe I would be looking at making it black and white. I can certainly do this here as well. So I'd like to say that other than cataloging, keywording, organizing images into a database, Photoshop can do everything that Lightroom can do and more. You can certainly get into fine art effects as well with Photoshop. You have a number of filters available to you. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of some of these here. You can see under the filter gallery, I could certainly load this image into the filter gallery. And I can look at a number of interesting renderings You could spend a lot of time monkeying with different sort of artistic effects to your liking, depending upon kind of what you're after, and all the different like parameters of these different filters. And that's just the artistic set. You know, you can get into brush stroke sets as well. So there's a lot of options for Photoshop in terms of these sorts of filters, whether they're for some sort of creative endeavor or in the construct of fixing a photo in some way. You know, Photoshop has some very powerful capabilities. For example, you know, I could see what it would be like if I needed to remove this tree for some reason. I could come in here and select around this tree. So this is a lasso selection that I'm making. I'm selecting the object. And I could fill this object, and it has some powerful tools such as the ContentAware Fill, which allows me to get rid of this tree. Now this is something that you can't easily do in Lightroom, if at all. But here in Photoshop, a couple of swift moves, and I've done a pretty darn good job here of removing this tree, which then would allow me to come back with, say, the clone stamp and try to clean up this horizon line here to try to blend it in. Certainly people use terms like, you know, that image has been photoshopped. You know, it used to even be that people would use the term airbrush. Oh, that image has been airbrushed. I would hear that a lot. Even the time when Photoshop was being used a lot, I would overhear somebody say, oh, I think they airbrushed that image. And well, we're using Photoshop now. Certainly people are familiar with Photoshop in terms of images that have been edited to twist the truth, and people have seen that probably in terms of supermodels and their bodies and look being manipulated for beauty and for magazine covers and things like that. And Photoshop, you know, there are certainly some ethics that surround when and where and how and what is okay and how it's okay to use Photoshop in what way. But believe me, Photoshop is used on pretty much all images that you see in advertising and catalogs today. There's probably not a fashion magazine or editorial image out there that hasn't been touched in some way by Photoshop. So typically that process is people are taking their images, doing global, maybe some amount of local adjustments in a program like Lightroom or Capture One, and then the heavy lifting, they're taking that image from Lightroom or Capture One into a program like Photoshop, doing some of the heavier Photoshop maneuvers, and then saving it back to their database in Lightroom or Capture One. So that's, in a nutshell, what Photoshop is all about. Its whole deal is all about selecting objects, select to effect, things that you can't get in Lightroom. You know, another example of this sort of selecting would be, you know, if I, for whatever reason, needed to come in and make some adjustments to this logo here, I can use very precise tools in Photoshop to create a selection around an object, allowing me to make a very precise selection of something. In this case, I'm using the pen tool in Photoshop, and you can see here that as I use this tool and I load that, it shows up to these marching ants, and these marching ants then allow me to affect it in some way. I mean, I can load this selection any way that I'd like. I could load it and I could change the tonality of it. I could make it brighter or darker depending upon what I'm after. I can load that selection, and if I needed to, I can actually copy that information and lay it on its own layer here. And Photoshop operates in these like sort of skin layers where we have a background, the original photo, and then we begin layering sections on top of it, and it might be clipped out sections like you can see here. If I isolate this layer, we can see this is my clipped out section of that selection where everything around it is transparent, there's nothing there. Right now we just have this RMSP logo that's been taken off of this water canister and lifted off onto its own layer. And then over here we have the ability to view the selected portion. The part that's in white is selected, the part that's black is not selected on this, what we call a mask in Photoshop. And that mask can be loaded as an adjustment of some kind, brightness, contrast, color, things like that, and manipulated further. So I can take this clipped out bit and I can pick it up and I can move it around if I'd like. So you have the ability to copy and paste aspects of photos around. You can combine images together and create new images altogether. You can retouch beauty photographs to a much greater degree than any of the image editing programs to date. There's a few competitors out there that are kind of coming up and I think trying to take the reins away from Photoshop, specifically because Adobe has the subscription service, and I think some of these other programs are trying to compete with that by having standalone retouching software. But I still maintain that the features that you get in Photoshop are much more robust than any of these other programs right now. And it'd be interesting to see, as that competition continues, if any of these other programs begin to take over the market. But in terms of what Photoshop is, select to effect. You're able to make very precise selections of things and manipulate them to the nth degree. You can imagine it, it can be done in this program. So if you like this video, hit the thumbs up sign. If you didn't like this video, hit the thumbs down. If you'd like to leave a comment down below. We'll get back to you. If you'd like to subscribe to see more of this content, you can subscribe up there, down there in the corner. Hit the little bell. It'll let you know when we have new videos up. Thanks to Canon and B&H for providing some of the equipment to make these videos possible. Thanks for watching.